What up, guys? Welcome to today's podcast. Today we have a good grappler, a guy named Sloan Clymer. The Caveman is his nickname. And we're having him on the podcast. I've watched Sloan at several tournaments. He's one of the guys where if I go out to a tournament, like say trials or something like that, and I see him like on a mat, I'll run around to go watch his match because they're typically fun. They're exciting. He's going for a finish. He's, going for the attack. And so I find his style enjoyable. And so I wanted to have him on the podcast. And so we reached out to him. He's also a nice guy.
Yeah,
usually
cool.
Usually when I see him out at tournaments or whatever, we always kind of make it a point. We'll come say, hey, whatever.
I think we talked to him at like ADCC in 2022.
Probably did. I saw.
He was super cool.
Yeah, I always see him at different tournaments, and so he's always a super cool guy. So I wanted to have him on the podcast. Obviously, we'll talk about his start in jiu-jitsu and some of his ideas on training and some of the things he does, so that hopefully you guys have a few nuggets to take away for your own training and your own development. And anybody that's maybe a little bit younger, who's thinking about like getting up and taking the leap into full-time jiu-jitsu and up and moving to a different city or whatever, then this could he did that, so you'll have some interesting sort of thoughts from that on the podcast. But again, we'll jump into it. And again, thank you guys for being here. Thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD, again, broken record if you listen to the podcast very often, but again, Charlotte's Web is the CBD that I use, the CBD that we use on the pod here for Eugene and I. And again, they've been a sponsor for the podcast a long time. One of the reasons why I like their stuff is that they're third-party tested. So in a field like CBD supplements, which is all unregulated, basically people can just get away with, giving you whatever they want to in these vials. They don't necessarily have to produce a good product. And there was some studies done years ago where that was in fact what was happening with a lot of the product out there. They're third-party tested to ensure what's in the bottle is what's in the bottle. And they're I remember talking to one of the representatives out in Colorado, and they were saying that, whenever this stuff does get regulated, which eventually will, they will be ready to go because they're already doing all the processes to ensure the quality of it. And if you actually look at their backstory and why they created it, it's worth reading about or watching a video on, because it's pretty interesting. They created it for a young girl named Charlotte. That's where the Charlotte's Web name comes from. And so they kind of always talk about that. That's kind of their mantra within the organization. Is this something that we could do for Charlotte? Is it something that could help a Charlotte? That kind of thing. Are you having integrity with your product? So there's integrity throughout the organization with their products. And again, they do a good job of making what they make. And I like their products. So again, if you guys want to check out any of their CBD products on their website, you can get 30% off using the promo code Chewjitsu30 for 30% off. And that's at charlottesweb.com. Also, thanks to my buddy Matt at Epic Roll. Just letting you guys know, currently I'm getting some prototypes made for the next style of jiu-jitsu rash guard and shorts. And so we're going to get some of those made. And once they're made, you guys will be able to see them. And then hopefully in the near future, we'll have another batch of new designed rash guards and shorts from Matt at Epic Roll. Again, one of the reasons why I use Matt to make my rash guards and make my gym's rash guards is because it's great quality. He does a good job with the customer service. And again, I just like dealing with him. He's a good dude, and he's a jiu-jitsu practitioner that's out rolling, competing, and likes to support other people in the jiu-jitsu sphere to do the same. And so again, if you guys want to check out any of his products that he has currently, he's got great things from t-shirts and rash guards and gis and shorts and hoodies and whatever else that you might be looking for. Just go to his website at epicrollbjj.com and use the promo code Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. Also, guys, if you want to support the podcast directly, you can check us out and become a patron at, do they call it patron at Patreon?
Yeah, I think
you're a patron at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. We have an exclusive library of content that's been building for several years now. I have everything from recorded seminars that I've done, warm-up routines and stretching routines from Eugene, which would be great for a lot of you guys that are getting a little bit older and you need to kind of keep your body nice and loose as you're getting older and try to move around on the mats. Or if you're just newer and you're a little bit stiff, could be really useful to you. Along with it, there's a bunch of different videos that are on there, everything from talking videos similar to the ones I do on YouTube, rolling videos, things like that. That again aren't released on YouTube anywhere, and you get access to them there at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And last but not least, guys, if you would like to get my daily email, where I go into everything from competition tips to training ideas to just random stuff that I want to share with you, books that I'm reading, everything else in between. You can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join, JOIN. When you join, you'll get access to a couple of free ebooks. One is on developing a jiu-jitsu game plan, super important. The other one is to give you some drilling strategies for training, where if you can't control your training, or even if you can, there's some different active training strategies that you can use in your rolling sessions to get more from them. Again, it's a big deal, very important. And again, you get those 2 ebooks when you join up. And again, that's at jujitsu.net/join. And so, guys, with that said, let's jump into this podcast with Sloan.
Well, it's cool, man. I appreciate you taking the time, brother.
No, thank you for having me on, guys. This is awesome. I was telling Chewy that, especially like in my younger days when I was coming up through the ranks as like a purple belt, and even as a brown belt, I was listening to not only this podcast a lot, but I was watching a lot of his videos and just trying to absorb as much information as I can. And so I feel like, a lot of the information that you've relayed over the years, that's like kind of what I've soaked up as an instructor and, as a competitor and just practitioner as myself. So I appreciate all the years of knowledge that you put out for free online. It's super helpful.
I appreciate it, man. I'm getting old. I was looking at like some of my old videos, like, man, I've been doing this shit for almost like 10 years. It's so like people are like, black belts, and they're like, man, I remember watching you when I was a white belt. I'm like, oh, wow.
Some people haven't done jiu-jitsu for 10 years, like, I mean, you've been making videos longer than they've been training.
I'm getting old.
Is there Sloan, I'm curious, is there something like a message that Chewy has shared or something? No, I'm just curious. This is interesting. I'm not trying to do it to be weird, but like, he says he's taken some of the, as far as coaching goes, some like tips, and what are some like ideas that maybe that you've implemented into your coaching or being a good coach now that, you're kind of a black belt and leader at your gym?
Well, one thing I noticed about Chewy and his videos, I think I started watching your videos when I was still a blue belt, I believe. But one thing I noticed like about him, and not to try to toot your horn or anything, it's just that the authenticity and just the transparency. And I'm like, okay, this is how I need to be as an instructor. Just be like as honest as possible about things. Don't act like I know everything. Remove your ego. You know what I mean? And that's not something that you see a lot of. I mean, there's plenty of great instructors out there, but there's a lot out there too that maybe you know what I mean. So that was one thing that I took on, that not even like, maybe, I don't know if you ever like made videos talking about that necessarily. It's just kind of just the way that you held yourself and the way that you talked about things regarding grappling and practicing. And that was like, okay, I want to be like this guy. I just want to be, very as real as possible, as honest as possible. Don't act like I know everything. You know what I mean? Stay humble, be a student, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember like when I first started teaching, I was a brown belt, right? So I couldn't even act like I knew everything. And then I remember like, not that I ever did it intentionally. I was just like, I was just being real with people, right? That's all it was. But I remember even in turn, like when you start, like there was a guy years ago where he came to my gym from another gym. He asked me a question, and I think it was on a Darce choke. And this is like, I'm a brown belt. This is like 2009. I didn't have a good answer for him. I was like, I was like, give me about a week and I'll get back to you. And so I went through and was like researching it, whatever else. And then like, because of his body, he was having trouble finishing the Darce. I was like, come here. Next Friday, I came back. I said, come here real quick. I was doing some research or whatever. And I was like, try this out. And then boom. Then it was like, oh, he felt he could hit the Darce choke and it felt comfortable to him. Because I looked up some adjustments to it. And he had told me, I guess, that like, a lot of times that he was at like another gym. And if the coach basically just didn't want to go over something, like you said, instead of it just being like, hey, let me figure this out, he would either just shoot him down and like stupid question, or he always kind of gave off this air of I know everything. And I'm like, well, I'm still a brown belt, so I don't know everything. I'm still figuring this shit out. And of course, like you, once you if you're a competitive black belt, you get into black belt and you realize you still don't know shit. So, you always have to stay humble about it. It's like, we all know like a lot of stuff about a very small area. Like you probably have tons of details and stuff about guillotines, but there's other stuff that you don't know as well. Right. So
sure. Yeah. So it's so true. Just like if you're an instructor, you don't have to know everything. And I think that's something a lot of people run into. Like at some point, if you're teaching, you're going to be asked something that you don't have a good answer to. And it's okay to just say, I don't know, man. Let me do some research, and I'll get back to you if I find something better, or maybe you could ask that guy. Maybe that, even though that guy maybe hasn't even been training as long as me, I see him in this leg lock position a lot more than I find myself in it. He might have a better answer for you. You know what I mean?
That's right. Well, and that's one of the things, if you start teaching, one of the aspects of teaching that makes your jiu-jitsu better is that, like, if it's just doing it for you, then you're kind of just focusing on, one body type, one style, everything else, and how that technique works with that. But when you start teaching, you're then dealing with lots of different people, different styles, different body types, everything else. And a lot of times they ask questions, and they're good questions. Yeah. And then you have to figure out the answers to those. And right. So it's another level of problem solving, because obviously when we're trying to use the technique on someone, that's a level of problem solving. And then now we're trying to figure out, how does this technique that I use work for a completely different body type, different style, everything else. And then you have to like start playing that same troubleshooting style or sort of mindset to that. And it really makes you understand whatever techniques you're showing on a much deeper level, because you're having to really break them down into a much more small little chunk that someone else can digest.
100%. Yeah, that's something that, I run into that all the time. And but ultimately, it just makes you better too. You know what I mean? And the body types thing is a big one, though. Like it's something that I find myself saying a lot now when I'm teaching classes is jiu-jitsu is like, it's not a one size fits all. Like not everything that you learn are you going to be able to do effectively. Like there are people with short legs that are going to struggle with triangles,
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, could they triangle like a 12-year-old kid? Sure they could, because there's not, even though they have short legs, with a 12-year-old kid, there's a lot less arm and body to wrap your legs around. But then if they're doing it on another, 200-pound man, maybe they don't have good legs for a triangle choke. And maybe that's not the best thing for them to focus on getting good at, and so it's all about what works for you. And that's something that I try to be as honest about as possible whenever I'm going over something.
That's right. Because it's like, sometimes you're going to run into people, like you said, I mean, honestly, you can look at people sometimes and you might honestly have a idea as to what they're going to go for. You know what I mean? Like you said, you look at some guy with long old legs, probably going to be good with triangles. You look at someone that's got like gorilla arms, like they're friggin' dragging with their knuckles on the ground, probably going to have great Darce chokes and like anacondas and stuff where they get those arm triangles and they have the arm length to do it. I mean, like if you look at like Pixley's got some long arms. Like when he snaps guys down and go, I mean, he's just got it. And then you even get guys like, one of the things, I don't know about you, but like I've seen guys that are like thick like you, and like, I don't know how, I've never looked at your arm length, but it looks like you're kind of like stout and kind of like compact. And so some of the guys that I know that have the best guillotines are kind of compact. It's like they can just like coil around someone's neck and I mean, just snag it. And they don't have a lot of extra with their arms and stuff like that. And so, I imagine there was a cool book years ago I read called the Sports Gene by David Epstein. And in it, he was just talking about how like certain body types and certain like mutations in our genes and stuff like that are going to sort of predispose us to being better at certain sports. And he was talking about like basketball, and in basketball, it's not just height, it's height, of course, but it's more importantly, they found that the two big correlates, if you were going to be an NBA player, were your arm length in relation to your height. So you had to have really long arms, and then your vertical jump. If those two things were like at a certain level in relation to your height, like you were probably going to be a good candidate for the NBA. And like, you could go look at players like Muggsy Bogues or whatever, who was super short, but he had really long arms. He had a great vertical. And so like, I imagine if some really bright brainiac dude came along, they could probably have you measured out and could probably tell you, here's probably going to be the best submissions and techniques for you, the best positions for you, based upon like how long your femur is and how long your shoulder to your fingertips, everything else.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. It's funny to look at it that way.
Is guillotine kind of like your go-to? Is that one of your favorite techniques that you utilize?
Yeah. I mean, as far as like my favorite techniques, it's kind of always switching, but generally speaking, chokes are my favorite. I mean, like for years, it was the rear naked choke. That was like my best submission. I could just take backs, and that's the one I felt the most confident and comfortable with. That's what I won a lot of matches with. And then at some point, it transitioned to the guillotine and a lot of the front headlock chokes. And so I would say, like, as of right now, that's probably one of, or maybe my best move is like a guillotine choke, but it's not just one specific guillotine. It's like, I have like 4 or 5 variations of the guillotine choke that, you know, they all just kind of tie in with each other. You know what I mean? Like if one doesn't work, if there's a defense to it, then I go to this other variation of it. You know what I mean? If that one doesn't work, I go back to this other one. And so, yeah, it's you know, arm in, arm out, mounted guillotines, cow catchers, like from side control with just the chin strap. I do that a lot too. So yeah, that whole realm is like probably my go-to, my favorite.
What was your kind of process of developing just a really high level guillotine, and that like, first of all, developing the guillotine and then building off it with this chain of kind of guillotines, with a chain of submissions? How did you start to develop that, and maybe even go into your coaching or teaching? How do you teach that to your students?
Well, it was one of the first things I ever learned from my dad was a guillotine choke. He's like, hey, this is a really simple move that you can do after, you know, your first day of learning it. And my dad always he was the one who got me into martial arts and jiu-jitsu, and he really pushed chokes on me. Like he's like, look, man, you know, arm bars are cool, Kimuras are great, all that stuff's awesome, but nothing beats being able to put somebody to sleep. If you can attack a neck, it's the best thing to do. And so rear naked chokes and guillotines, those were like the main 2 things he had me doing all the time. And side chokes or head and arm chokes from, you know, mount, side control, that sort of thing. And then, you know, I won my very first jiu-jitsu match with a guillotine. I think I won like my first 5 jiu-jitsu matches with a guillotine choke, actually. And it just is something that always came very natural to me. I got pretty good at snap downs at a young age. Like that was like my first way of getting good at any kind of takedown. It was always a snap down and getting to that front headlock, dragging guys to the mat. And then from there, I was either attacking the guillotine or I was hitting a go behind to take the back and go for my rear naked choke. And then, you know, as years went on, it's like, I just found myself in that position so many times. And even it's funny how, you know, grappling works, because it's like, once I got to like maybe, I don't know, a purple belt level, when you're a purple belt in the gym, you're typically going to roll with all the higher level guys. Like you're mostly rolling with other purple, browns, or black belts, you know, at least I was like that. And so there was even a time maybe I got away from the guillotine for a little bit because I would try it on like a brown or a black belt and it wouldn't work. And I'd be like, well, damn, what am I doing wrong? You know what I mean? I gotta like, something's not working with this. And then, so then I got away from it for a little bit and then maybe started like attacking arm bars more or something. And then later on came back around to it and just tightened it up and developed it that much more and figured out more and more variations. And, you know, now it is what it is. Like I said, it's probably my number one submission that I've won with in competition. And, you know, as far as teaching it goes, I mean, you know, we go over, I mean, everything. I kind of have like a laid out curriculum, but, you know, when it's like front headlock week, you know, we're heavy on not only like all these variations and the defenses to them too. And so that's something I mean, I do that with everything though, not just my guillotines. I talk about like, okay, there, you know, there's this. So there's like, you know, your high elbow conventional guillotine, and here's how people typically will escape it. And this is, you know, here's a good way to escape it. And then if they try to escape it, you know, then you could do this, or, you know what I mean? And so we just kind of like will build from defenses and reactions to whatever it is that we're attacking.
Makes sense. Now, you were talking about your dad in, you know, jiu-jitsu. How did you get started in grappling, and like, how old were you?
Well, I have a funny background story with grappling. Well, my dad, he was always into martial arts. Like he was pretty big martial arts enthusiast from the time, before I was born. He wrestled in high school. He boxed in high school. Then he went to the Marines. He was in the Marines for a bit, and he even boxed a little bit in the Marines when during his service. And then he got out. He did some karate. He got heavily into bodybuilding, and then UFC 1 came along, and he was like, okay, what's this? Like, this is a pretty interesting sport. And not long after UFC 1, I'm from Indiana, by the way. So, that's where
what part of Indiana?
Anderson. So just about 45 minutes, like northeast of Indianapolis.
Okay.
Yeah. And, so my dad got talked into doing a fight. Like right after UFC 1, they were doing a lot of those like underground in and outs, And my dad got talked into doing one, and he was like, "Yeah, I think I know how to fight. You know what I mean? I'll go do this." So he goes and fights some random dude, and little did he know, this guy that he fought was I think he was like a Henzo Gracie purple belt or something.
Oh wow!
And I think my dad, like, from my understanding, my memory of the fight, I was very little. I didn't even go with him. I was probably 3 years old when he did this fight. But from what I was told, like, my dad like walked this guy down, punched him a couple times, took him down, and then got armbarred by this guy. My dad didn't even know what tapping out was. He didn't know that like tapping out was a thing. You know what I mean?
No.
So he's like getting his arm cranked, and the ref actually saved him and stopped him, like right as his elbow was starting to pop and dislocate. It didn't fully go, but he said his elbow was like a mess for months after. He didn't get it operated on or anything. But so after that, though, he was like, what the hell was that? Like, what did that guy just do to me? I'd never seen that before, And he was in the guy's guard, like looking back. He was like, I was on top of this guy, and he throws his leg over my face. And next thing I know, my arm's getting extended. And so he just became a nut about jiu-jitsu. And he just went on this like mission to learn jiu-jitsu however he could. He started buying Hoist Gracie VHS tapes online. He started like finding seminars like that, the old school MMA fighters were putting on. He went to a Hoist Gracie seminar that was in like Chicago, I think. And he was just like trying to absorb as much information as possible. And so by the time I was 6 years old, my dad was already in it for, 2 or 3 years. He competed in a few competitions and stuff. And I actually learned a rear naked choke when I was like 6, I think. I think I was 6 years old when my dad taught me how to apply a rear naked choke. Yeah. And so even though I hadn't started jiu-jitsu formally yet, I knew how to do rear naked chokes like my whole life almost. And I was like going around on the playground, and whenever a kid would mess with me, I'd just take their back and strangle them.
I was about to say, giving a 6-year-old back then a choke.
Yeah, it was like, I just knew I had this like little secret weapon that other little kids didn't have. And so anytime a kid would, mess with me or I get picked on the playground, that was just my go-to. I'd just take their back and strangle them. And I never like put them to sleep. My dad was always like very, like he taught me from the time that he taught me the rear naked choke. He was like, hey, you got to let go of this if someone gives up, or even just after a few seconds, He was like, you got to let go. He taught me what tapping out was too, and that sort of thing. So, but he got me into it, when I was probably 15 years old. And that's when I started to join him in his training sessions, which we did in our barn in my backyard. My dad he laid out mats. We still got this barn to this day. I still train in it every time I go home. And it's just like got a bunch of weights, and in the back there's a heavy bag, and there's a big puzzle mat space. And so my dad was holding training sessions out there every weekend. He would have he'd have anywhere from 6 to 12 guys in there every Saturday and Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. And, when I was 15, somewhere around there, I started joining them and training with them. And we did everything. We would do jiu-jitsu, we would box, we would do strength and conditioning. and I just fell in love with it.
Now, here's a question for you, because that's like, I think, every guy who, has a son, and if the guy is like ate up by jiu-jitsu, right? Or really, it's anything. Every guy like who has a son wants to pass down the thing that he's into to the son, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like a lot of times, sometimes you're not really into it. Were you into it before you were 15 and your dad was like, not yet? Or was it one of those things where like, you're you see what he's doing, you're like, whatever. And then you eventually come around to it. I guess what I'm asking is, how did your dad present it to you in a way where you decided, I want to do this, but you didn't feel like it was being pressured onto you, which typically repels people away?
Okay, well, I got a story for you.
Okay.
So my whole life, from the time that I was 6, like from the time I learned the rear naked choke, he was trying hard to get me into martial arts. And I don't know what it is, like with my brain, I'm still like this to this day. Like, I can't stand structure, like too much structure. I don't like the thought of that. So he brought me to several judo academies when I was little. He was like, hey, why don't we do this class or just watch? I was not into it. He tried to get me to wrestle when I was little. So I actually did wrestle for a couple seasons when I was like in kindergarten and first grade. He just kind of forced me to go. He's like, hey, we're doing this. And so he'd get off work and we would drive up to my school, and there was a little children's freestyle wrestling club. And I just hated going. I hated it. Like, it was just, I remember being in these wrestling practices and I was just perpetually confused. I was like, what? Like, I have to roll this guy on his back and pin him, and they're talking about points. And I remember I didn't like all the structure. I was like, this is like, it just confused me, and I wasn't interested at all. And so after a couple years of doing that wrestling, I just like would complain every night, like, I don't want to do this. And he eventually was like, all right, well, okay, I'm done forcing you into martial arts. And so he just stopped altogether. And so, from age 8 to 14 or 15, I was just, kind of a punk kid, like just, I skateboarded a lot and, rode my BMX bike and stuff. And then one day I had a friend who I hung out with a lot in like early high school, middle school. And this kid was, he was stronger than me. Like, he was like a bigger, thicker, stronger athletic kid, but he wasn't like as scrappy as I was. He wasn't as like I kind of had that chip on my shoulder, from an early age. I don't know why. I was just like that. I just was kind of, I was ornery. I kind of would like look for fights sometimes, maybe, and so, between the two of us, it was kind of like an unspoken thing. Like, I was the tougher one, even though he was the more athletic, bigger, stronger kid. He lifted weights with football players, and he played football himself. Well, one day, me and this kid wrestled in his living room, and he just threw me around, dude. This kid, like, and that wasn't how it was supposed to go. Like, my ego had a different idea of myself. I was like, I can beat Cody up. He can't, but he just threw me around. He's just too big and strong. And he also, I think he wrestled a little bit when he was a kid too. I had nothing for this guy. And I remember he held me down in his living room. It was playful. It wasn't like we were fighting or anything.
Sure.
But he held me down in what I later learned was side control, and I could not get him off me. I was like bucking and bridging and pushing, and afterward, that kind of chewed me up. My ego was bruised after that night when we wrestled. And I went home the next day, and my dad, every night after work, he would go out into his barn and he would lift weights. Like, even, so he had the weekend session with his buddies, where they would all train jiu-jitsu and boxing and stuff. And then throughout the week, he would go out in the gym after work and he would lift weights, hit the heavy bag. And so anytime I'd go home and he was off work, and, I always knew he was in the barn lifting weights. So I walked out there one night and I said, hey, Cody and I wrestled, and he put me in this position that I couldn't get out of. And I knew my dad knew the answers to a lot of this stuff. Like, I knew that he knew jiu-jitsu, and I was like, how do I get somebody off me when they hold me down like that? Like, And my dad was like, oh, well, there's this thing called shrimping. He's like, let me show you. He's like, let's get on the mats. And he, put me in side control, or maybe he had me put him in side control. And he's like, so you want to do this thing where you get your frames in, and that's going to kind of help you create some space. And he was like, I'll never forget the way that he explained how to shrimp and get out from under somebody. He said, you don't want to just use your strength to try to push them off you. You want to use just enough strength to push them a little bit one way, and then you're going to move your body out from underneath them. And so he's like, think of it as like they're going a little bit this way and you're going a little bit that way. And he was like, and that should create enough space so that you can either get your legs back in front of them, like, so that you're in a guard, or you can stand back up and get to your feet again. And so he had me drill that on him, just drilling the shrimp and pushing and using my frames. And after that night, I remember just thinking, like, I need to learn this stuff. I should probably learn this, because I don't want that. That was embarrassing. I don't want that to happen to me again. And to know that this kid that I thought I was a lot tougher than could manhandle me like that, it scared me. I didn't like that feeling. And so shortly after, I just started popping into the gym on the weekends with my dad and his buddies, and started rolling and boxing with them. And it was scary and it was hard at first, and I was sore a lot, and I would leave some of the sessions crying because I just felt like I sucked, but ultimately, it ended up making me who I am right now. So it was a pretty cool start to all this. And that was it, though, was that moment of me getting beat up. That was when I said, okay, I got to learn some of this stuff.
What was it about the grappling that so once you got a little better at it, what kept you kind of coming back? Like, once you could kind of, all right, I can defend myself against kids my own age or maybe even a little bigger than me. What kept you kind of interested in like maybe I can go further with this, or, eventually now you're a coach and compete at a high level. Like, what got you interested in sticking with it?
Well, I mean, the idea of because I looked at my dad as like, this guy is a badass, you know what I mean? Like, he is the definition of a tough guy. My dad knew how to fight. He was a big, strong guy. And so, once I got to my teens, I looked up to my dad, I think, a lot more than I realized I did. And I wanted to be like him, and I wanted to make him proud. And I was like, okay, I got to be tough like he is. So I got to keep doing this stuff. And the innate feeling that you get that keeps you excited to doing it was, I was learning these submissions, mainly chokes. Like, that was all my dad was having me do when I would go out there. And then I would basically grapple with my friends in high school, or I would bring them over during the week, and I'd be like, hey, let's go out in the barn and let's wrestle around, or we'll box or something. And when I could strangle them, that felt good. You know what I mean? Because it got to a point I was inviting like all the toughest kids at my school over. And it was always like they were my friends, but they kind of wanted to test themselves against me. They knew that I was training, and they're like, all right, let's see what Sloan's got. And, when I could bring these big jock kids over to my house, big football players, wrestlers, whatever, and I could choke them all. That felt good. You know what I mean? Knowing that I had this superpower and this skill that other people didn't have. And so, and I knew how to escape side control. And, at this point I had kind of learned guard. So sometimes I would even bring kids over. I'm like, okay, I'm going to lay on my back and you just do whatever you want. Okay. And they didn't know what passing guard was or what guard was. And then they would fall on top of me, and I would just sweep them. And that was the coolest feeling in the world to me, that I could start on my back from this, what normal people think is a bad position to be in. And I could still somehow, tie guys up or choke them or sweep them with it. And so that was just exciting, And then it was by the time I was 16, my dad started putting me in grappling competitions. And obviously that was a thrill. I loved winning, and I thought, it was man, this is something I really think I want to do. I could see myself doing this for a living someday. So yeah, that's, I just kept the ball rolling. I had drop-offs and times of, where I wasn't training as much, when I was 18, 19, I went through a couple phases for 5 or 6 months, maybe I didn't get on the mats. I was just kind of being a loser and hanging around the wrong people and drinking and stuff and partying. But then I would always find my way back to it.
So I got to ask, before I ask you about, something else, but you had a barn. Did you guys have like animals there, like at all, or was it just like a barn for working out?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It wasn't a barn, like a big red barn. It was like a pole barn, like what I mean?
Yeah,
sheet metal and stuff. And
yeah.
So my dad had that barn built so we lived in this little neighborhood when I was born up until I was about 5 years old. We lived there, and in that garage of that house that we lived in, my dad had his like little weight set and everything. It was like his little gym. Mm-hmm. And then when we moved into this house a little bit out in the boonies, like outside of
land,
there's we're literally surrounded by cornfields.
Yeah,
and my dad just had this barn built like as cheap as he could get it, and then he just started moving all of his weights in there and got a spot in the back to put puzzle mats down, and then that became his cave. That became his place.
That's the dream right there.
It's like the man cave. Everybody got their man cave. Some guys like stock theirs with booze, and a lot of us we get workout equipment, right? So I was just curious because me and my wife have barn and some horse stuff, so I was wondering is he a horse owner? Anyway,
there's chickens just right next to him.
We're getting there. And so with that, I was going to ask you, while you were still in Indiana, I know you trained with your dad. Did you train with any of the gyms that were there, or basically was it just something where you kind of trained with your dad mostly and before you moved out to California? I don't know the trajectory, like you're training in Indiana, then leading up to California.
Yeah. So 90% of my training was informal, from age 15 to age 20. Mm-hmm. I did go to when I was 17, I started popping into this little MMA gym in Indiana called the Iron Horse. It's in Pendleton, Indiana. Okay. And it was like a small MMA gym. They would do a little bit of grappling. They just did everything, some jiu-jitsu, boxing, all that stuff. And so I started, going to that gym once or twice a week. And then once I was probably 20, 21, that's when I started to get serious about okay, this is definitely what I want to do for a living someday. I started just cross training in Indianapolis a lot. So, I would go to Alan Stockman's, I would go to Fisher's, BJJ, James Klingerman's gym, some other ones that I visited. There was this open mat at this fitness gym once a week that I started going to a lot. And there was a jiu-jitsu class at American Top Team in downtown Indianapolis. I started going there once a week, but I was still doing a lot of my training just in the barn back home. You know what I mean? I was never a member at any of these gyms. I never signed up and became a member. I never got belted at any of these academies. So I was kind of technically a white belt for, my first 6 or 7 years of training. And then once I got to be 21, 22, I was I got to move out of here because I want to really dive into this stuff as deep as it gets. And so then I decided to pack my stuff and move to San Diego, and here we are.
How did that whole experience happen? Because I think that's something a lot of young people in jiu-jitsu, they look at that. They look at oh, I just want to go, move out of here and go train at a bigger gym. Cause a lot of people grow up in different smaller areas. And I want to just, pack up and move to a bigger city, train at one of the big gyms and do jiu-jitsu. What was that transition like? How did it come about?
For me, I was still kind of I don't want to say hanging around the wrong people, because I still love all these guys that I was hanging out with, but
different goals.
When I was 18 to age 22, when I finally moved out here to San Diego, me and a lot of my friends were they were all partiers and drinkers and rowdy. We'd go out and get bar fights and stuff like that. It was very common to do that on the weekends. And there was one night specifically we went out, and what's weird, I don't even know what happened like psychologically to me that evening, but I went out with my friends. We got in a bar fight, not even a bad one. We've been in worse situations than this specific night, but you know, the night got ugly. One of my buddies got kind of jumped by a bunch of bouncers at this bar, and we almost got arrested. We somehow got away, but it was just a very messy evening. And I went home that night, and I remember just like, for whatever reason, that night was like the straw that broke the camel's back. I just like fell into a deep depression. And the next day I woke up and I just was like, I freaking hate my life here, dude. I hate Indiana. Like, what am I doing every weekend? I'm just like, I know I have goals. I know I have things like a passion and something that I want to do. What am I doing going out on the weekends and getting into, you know, these dumb situations all the time that like, it's going to lead to something worse. Like I'm going to get hurt, you know what I mean? If I keep this up, or I'm going to end up in jail or something, you know? And that very next day, I just started looking all over. Like I pulled up the map on my iPhone and just started like looking all over the US. Like, where is another state that I can move to that I know has a lot of jiu-jitsu and has a lot of MMA training and that sort of thing. And, you know, so it was really like, okay, well, it's either California or like Florida. Like I need to move to one of those places. And I didn't know anybody in Florida. I knew one person that lived in San Diego, and I knew San Diego would be a good spot. There's a lot of gyms out here. And I didn't even know this guy that well. He was like an acquaintance, you know, he's like a friend of a friend of a friend, you know. And I wrote this guy on Facebook and I said, hey, man, what, you know, how long have you lived in San Diego? What are you doing out there? I'm really considering moving out there. Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh, hey, what's up, Sloan? Good hearing from you. He wrote me like everything that he's doing. He's like, yeah, I work with this moving company out here, and I've lived out here for a couple of years now, and it's awesome. And he was like, if you want to come live out here, you can just stay on my couch until you get your own apartment. And he was like, you know, I'll just like, I'm totally fine with that. And I was like, dang, that's really generous of this guy to offer that.
Was this a jiu-jitsu guy as well?
No, he wasn't a jiu-jitsu guy at all. He was just one of like I said, a friend of a friend. And Daniel Puckett is his name. He's actually living back in Indiana now. But yeah, he was nice enough to let me use his couch. And so I just drove out to San Diego, like, you know, a few months later. He was like, I'll get you a job working with the moving company that I work with. And he was like, you know, and you can kind of get on your feet that way. And so I ended up packing my bags. I drove out to San Diego and I stayed on his couch for, I think, a total of 9 days.
Okay.
Or on the 9th day, I signed the lease to my apartment. And on the 12th day, I moved into my apartment.
What year is this?
This was 2015.
Okay.
Yep. And I just took a chance, dude. Everyone was doubting me too. Like all my friends and stuff. They were, not all of them. There was a couple of them that were really happy for me for taking a chance, but some of them were like, dude, that's not going to work, bro. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to work with a moving company. You're going to stay on this guy's couch. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to do jiu-jitsu and I'm going to fight. I'm going to do all this stuff. And I think everyone just thought like that, you know, I don't know, man. It's a pretty far-fetched idea, but I figured out.
What did your father think about it?
He didn't want me to go.
Sure.
It was selfishly, he didn't want me to go. I was his buddy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
My dad were good friends. And so I was like one of his main training partners. And, you know, he kind of pretend supported the idea. Like he was like, okay, you know, if you got to go, yeah, I understand.
Reluctantly.
Yeah, he didn't want me to though. And even like my first, you know, 6 months out there, it was like I had some hard times where I was really depressed, and I had a girlfriend at the time back home, and you know, it was like I felt lonely a lot out there. And my dad, I would like call my dad, and maybe I'd be like crying or something, and be like, this sucks. I don't know. I'm like scared. My dad'd be like, hey, bro, you can just come back home.
Yeah, come on back home.
He's like, you got the room here still at home. He's like, you can, you know. I'm like, no, dude, I can't do that to myself. I'm on a mission. I gotta stay out here, and I'm glad I did.
I think as a dad, like my son's 8 years old, and it's just like it would be hard, like to have your kid leave, like, cause I think, you try to support them, but you can also like protect them in some ways. And that way he's got like basically, first of all, there's distance. So he probably misses you incredibly much. But the other thing is like, there's no way he can really like, it's hard to guide or like support you in any specific way. So you feel kind of loss of control in that way. I think as a parent, like as opposed to you living closer to home, you feel like you have more ability to keep your kids safe in some way. I think he's always gonna try to be protective over you. I feel like that's just kind of what parents do.
But I feel like this is what men have to do.
I know it is, but it's just like, it's never easy. Like, right. Like I think you're ready for your kids to like, once they're 18 or 19 or however, and they're ready to go out on their own, like you want them to do that. But also like he said, like you're probably selfish, especially like you guys are buddies and you're close and you train together and you have like probably a deeper connection than just some father sons have. Cause like, I mean,
for sure.
Probably, sweat and grappled on the mats and done some pretty intense. It's just like you get close to your training partners, right? When you're out there training, you train hard with each other. Yeah.
But yeah, even more so with your dad, you know what I mean? It's like he was teaching me all my lessons. Like he was like, he's a huge part of why I teach the way I do and why, everything. Like he was a big part of my development. And so it was hard for me too, man. Like I was like, that was one of the toughest decisions I ever had to make. Like that was really hard on me, dude, because my roots are deep in Indiana and I love my family a lot. And like seriously, I remember I was working as a correctional officer at the time in Indiana, and like I knew this was like this was the decision. I was making this decision. I was doing it. There was no backing out. I was like, okay. Yeah, I remember when it was like 2 weeks out. I was like October 5th. I'm driving out. I was like working one of my last nights in that correctional facility. All the inmates are sleeping, and I'm sitting in the officer's cage. It's like 3 a.m. I was working a third shift, and I was sitting there, and I'm always reading my book. And I just, you got a lot of time to think in those hours. It's just everybody's sleeping. It's dead quiet in there. I remember one of my last nights there, I was sitting in there crying, just like crying my eyes out. I'm thinking, I hope none of these inmates wake up and see me crying my eyes out. They're all pretty cool. They all I had a good relationship with the inmates in there. They all had a lot of respect for me. But still, I was like, I was taking it really hard because it was like breaking up with your hometown and everything that and all your friends and family. And I knew I was coming back, like deep down. I was like, there's no coming back. I'm doing this. And I'm moving on with my life. So it was tough, man, but I'm very glad I did it. I love, my life and the way it's going now.
Yeah. Well, especially at that age too, you think about how, it's like all the sensations that you have when you're younger, they're so much more powerful because you've never experienced them before. It's the first time you think about the first breakup you ever had. I mean, God, what a big deal it was, right? You dated the girl for a month and it's like, oh, it's the end of the world or something. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then, as you get older, you're like, whatever, like, figure it out, have a pity party day, and then we'll be back to it tomorrow. You're going through those emotions and you're still a young dude. You're barely an adult. Your brain's not even fully formed yet, and you're about to leave everything that behind you. That's a lot to like have weighing on you, on your mind, especially at that age.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
How did you go about so you get there to San Diego? Did it take you a while to find your gym, that your home gym? Did you bounce around? What was that process like?
It's crazy, man. The first gym that I trained at in San Diego ended up being the gym that I was at for the next 4 years, which was 10th Planet, San Diego. And so I knew that by this time, I knew that I liked no gi more than the gi. I liked the gi too. I liked both, but I really liked no gi, and I wanted to get good at no gi. And so I was like, let's go see what this 10th Planet school's like. And I went there and trained, and Boogeyman, he was the head instructor at the gym. And he said, well, he saw me roll, and he came up to me after class. He was asking me where I was from and stuff. And then he was like, yeah, man, come back sometime. I'd like to have you train here. And then I went back a few days later. I paid the drop-in fee again. And I rolled again. I saw him like while I was rolling, like watching me in every round. Mm-hmm. And then he came up to me. He's like, "So what's your plan?" He's like, "Are you gonna are you wanting to stick around and train?" And I was like, "Dude," I said, I'm broke right now. I just moved here from Indiana. I was like, "I'd love to train. I just don't have the money to sign up." And he was like, "Well, dude, I was watching you. You're pretty good." And he was like, "I like you. I like your attitude." He was like, "What if like you just clean the mats every night after training and you can just train for free?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I love that." And so that's what I did. I just started cleaning the mats to pay my membership dues. And after about a year, well, like 3 weeks into me being at that school, he gave me a blue belt because he was like, "You're definitely not a white belt." And
yeah.
He just gave me my blue belt right away. And then like less than a year later, he gave me my purple belt.
Right.
And then shortly after that, I started teaching at his gym. And then I did that for the next 3-ish years, something like that. And then actually I had a falling out with not him, not Boogie. I still have a pretty good relationship with him, but the owner of that gym, the guy doesn't even do jiu-jitsu. He just like, he butts heads with everyone. And I eventually just had to leave. And so shortly after that though, I talked to Keenan, and he just so happened to be opening Legion at that time. I was still a brown belt, and he offered me a job to start teaching here. And I've been here ever since. And like a year after me being here and teaching, Keenan gave me my black belt.
Nice. So you were on that, like you were on that Billy Madison jiu-jitsu plan, like just speeding through it. Because well, I've had a couple MMA fighters come in like that. Like we had one guy, he was a white belt pro fighter. And, you know, he came in on like one of his first days. He came in on a Ghee day. He had a white belt on, and he had a camo Ghee on. He was wearing wrestling shoes. So he just looked like he was all out of sorts, right? Like people were like, "Who the hell is this guy?"
Out of everybody.
He guillotined one guy so hard he chipped his tooth. And like afterwards, so people are coming up to me. They're like, "Who?" Because they were taking it easy. They thought, "Oh, here's this like white belt who's wearing wrestling shoes and a camo Ghee. He doesn't know what's going on." And then, you know, afterwards, I had to tell everybody in the middle of class, "Oh, guys, like, hey, he's a pro fighter. He's been training for like, 10, 12, whatever, 15 years. And we got him up to brown belt pretty darn quickly because, it's like he had no business being at white belt or blue belt. And so it's like, we're just moving him along. So,
yeah, that's, I mean, if the skill's there and they've been training,
that's right.
It's like I spent like 7 years as a white belt. So it's like for me to just be like blue belt for, 11-ish months or whatever, and then a purple belt for not a very long time is,
Well, right. And especially if you're trying to do this stuff like full-time, competitively, everything else, it's best to, if your skill's there, to get you up to black belt, because again, it's like, okay, like, you win, let's say that like, okay, we sandbag you and you win like purple belt worlds or something. Well, that's great. But once you get to black belt, no one's really going to give a damn if you won purple belt worlds. They're gonna be like, what'd you win at black belt? So it's best to get you up to, if your skill's there, get you up to black belt. So this way you can, win the matches at black belt and, while you're still young. Because we all know that we're, everybody knows we get older, you're on limited time. So if you can get into the black belt and you have the skill there, then get to competing, just, get it done while you're still young before you get all old and get the accumulation of damage from years of hard training.
Yep, exactly.
What's been like? Are you doing more Ghee at all since you're at Legion now, or just? I mean, I know you're coaching primarily no Ghee stuff, but everybody knows Keenan for like his lapels and all that stuff. And I don't even know if he trains, in Ghee that much or not. But like, what is that like? Been training with him and kind of at a new gym?
Yeah, when I joined this gym and started teaching here, it was the very start of 2020. We didn't have very many no Ghee classes. A lot was Ghee, and so I was doing a lot of Ghee at the time. But then, like I said, the gym had just opened, so we were still building like our membership base, and then COVID didn't help. Like shortly after they opened, COVID hit, and so we were down for a few months. But then after a while of of the gym being open, our member base grew enough that we started adding no Ghee classes like Monday through Friday, morning and night. And then I pretty much went, I mean, I still train in the Ghee like once a week, but yeah, it's like, now it's mostly no gi. And so there was a time though where I was doing gi like 3 or 4 days a week. And it was cool. I mean, I don't mind it. I think it's all good stuff as long as you're on the mat rolling. But I never got into all that like worm guard stuff that Keenan does. It's funny because it's like I'm a black belt under Keenan. And someone's like, "Oh, so you must know that stuff." I'm like, "No, I don't know any of it."
But I mean, I think sometimes that's like it sounds weird, but it can be a sign of a good gym because, you know, like I've been to some gyms where they have, especially like some of the Gracie gyms I've been to, where it's like you go in and it's like I'm rolling with the same dude the whole day. It doesn't matter which person I'm rolling with. They all have the same style, the same stuff. Everything's the same. Yeah. Whereas if I go to a gym where typically has more of a loose, open culture, you'll go in and it's like every round is like a different style. So even though the gym might be like ran by a guy who's heavy on pressure passing or something, all of a sudden you'll roll with a guy and he'll have this crazy inverted guard or something. And, you know, every person has a different style and they're being allowed to kind of explore and do their own thing rather than you have to fit in the lines here. And this is what we do. And we don't do anything else.
100%. That's how this gym is. And it's how it's been since, I mean, pretty much since it's been open. And, you know, I like to think I do a pretty good job encouraging that amongst students now that I'm one of the head guys. Like, look, guys, I'm going to teach you, you know, everything I know, but you do what you want to do. You know what I mean? You play the game that you want to play. I encourage you guys to, you know, if you want to go down the rabbit hole on YouTube even, you know, and be one of those YouTube guys that shows up and just tries new stuff. I'm okay with that too, as long as it doesn't interfere with your drilling in class. But it's like, you know, and I also something I say a lot when I'm teaching is like anything can work at the right time, you know? So it's like no one style is like end all be all, you know what I mean? Try new things, try new styles all the time. I encourage it. You know what I mean? I push that on our students. Go cross train, just absorb as much info as possible. And yeah, all of our students have like, it's like you roll one guy, like you said, it's like you get an inverted leg locker dude, and then you roll with another guy who's a smash passer and another guy who's just a heavy wrestler. And so it's cool. We got a really good mix of guys here.
What do you think as far as like becoming a high level competitor now? What do you think are some keys or some like really important ideas to focus on if somebody's maybe like a student of yours wants to be, you know, competing at a high level or even doing jiu-jitsu full time? Like what's some advice you would give them?
Well, you got to wrestle. You got to wrestle as often as possible. You know, because a lot of jiu-jitsu schools don't do a lot of stand up or they, you know, a lot of jiu-jitsu schools just start on the butt. And I'm not telling you, you know, if your school does that you need to leave that school necessarily. But if your school does that, then you should try to go to another school once a week that is practicing some stand-up wrestling, grappling, that sort of thing. Or even go to one of your local high schools and try to join in on one of their wrestling practices. You know what I mean? See if you can talk to the coach about doing that. Because that's what I do still to this day. I go to 2 different high schools and on top of the wrestling that we do here at the gym. So that's a big thing. I think being comfortable on your feet, because every match starts on the feet. And then another thing, I mean, if you want to be a high level competitor, you got to compete as much as possible. Like there are no ifs, ands, or buts. You just got to compete as much as possible. I don't care what tournament it is. No tournament should be below you. You know, I think that a lot of people, especially like once you see this a lot when people get to like, I don't know, maybe like a purple belt level or something. They go, well, I'm not going to do that grappling industries. I'm focusing on worlds. Yeah. Like, well, you should do the grappling industries to you know, get better prepared for worlds. Like every match is going to just help you level up, no matter if it's at a random Naga tournament or if it's, you know, at Pans or whatever. Just get out there and compete as often as you can, because and like something else that you'll see is a lot of people will try to take like the easy routes on competing. Like maybe, you know, they for example, they see a competition coming up, they look at their bracket and they go, well, I don't want to do this one because there's some tough guys in this bracket. I don't feel prepared to face that guy. He might beat me. Or maybe they go, well, okay, if that guy's in that bracket, then I'm going to just go up a weight class because I don't want to face him or something. Dude, face the hardships head on. Chase them down. Don't just face them. Like you should look for those. Look for the hard matches. Look to get uncomfortable. Try to lose. Try to get beat. And the more you do that, the younger you are, the more comfortable you get with just competition overall. And then you realize, like, it doesn't really matter, you know. Every time you compete, whether you win or lose, you're just going to get better. And avoiding those losses, you're not doing yourself any favors. You gotta just get out there and face them and be okay with that. And it's like, at the end of the day, we're all doing this because we want to be the best versions of ourselves as grapplers. Well, if you're avoiding the hard matches, guess what? You're avoiding getting better. You know what I mean? They go hand in hand. And you know, it's like losing is a big part of that. It's okay to lose. It's good to lose. I'm a big believer in it. It's like every loss I've ever had made me better and put me right where I am right now. I needed it. So,
well, and also too, sometimes you'll surprise the hell out of yourself when you face those tough matches. Cause I've had some, I'm sure you have too, where, you know, I had a guy from, you know, either a big name team that was faced up against, or I had a guy who, you know, on paper, this guy's probably going to beat me. So who gives a damn? Let's just go after it. And then I end up winning. And I'm like, whoa, like I didn't think I had that in me, you know? And again, the only way that you know how good you actually are is by finding those limits, right? So, you know, you go up against these tough guys, and sometimes, like, you might realize that you're better than what you think you are, because a lot of times we're sometimes overly critical of ourselves, right? And then, you know, we see all of our mistakes, whatever, but then you go out and you do it, and you're like, wow, I did really well at this tournament. Or the guy that I was really nervous about, I met that dude in the finals and I beat that dude. It can be sometimes like you said, you're trying to become the best version of yourself through this stuff. Well, the only way you find that out is if you have the courage to test yourself out and see where that limit is and see where you're actually at. And you only know that when you're up against tough people. You don't, you know, if you're like it's like why sandbagging is such a sad thing when you see someone where they're like, you know, they're a higher belt or something like that, and then they drop down. It doesn't happen very often anymore, but it used to be pretty bad. And, you know, what kind of honor in that, you know, is there? And like, what does that even show? If you beat someone that's not that good, you know, that doesn't show you how good you are or even test you. So whether it's a loss or just showing you who you really are, I think that, you know, having those tough matches is important.
Yeah. And you know, what you'll find out in taking those hard matches and, you know, jumping in those hard comps is you're a lot tougher than what you think. And when you face those people, that's like, I've had a lot of matches, like you said, Chewy, you know, where I was like, oh man, I'm going to get crushed by this guy. And then I go out and I tap him and I'm like, oh wait, I guess I'm not that bad at this stuff. Like, and then it gives you confidence. You're like, man, I want to go try to do that again to someone else. You know what I mean? So that's a good thing too, you know, but then if you do get smashed, who cares? Like you're going to learn from it. And you realize like, oh, that's the worst that could happen I got tapped. I got highlight reeled. So what? You know what I mean? It's jiu-jitsu, dude. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah,
you know?
And you forget about it pretty darn quickly, and so does everyone else, right? So, you know, like everybody's been, if you've been competing long enough and you've been testing yourself, unless you're one of a very few people, you've probably been highlight reeled. You know I have. And people forget about it pretty quickly. You know, it's like, sure, like it might be floating around the internet for a couple days, but again, there'll soon be on to the next cat video or whatever else goes viral on the internet, and then they forget about it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yep. I remember the like one big highlight reel that, you know, I was on the receiving end of. I was a brown belt, and it was Dan Martinez. I'm sure you guys might know who he is. Yeah. He's really good. He's in Florida, but we were in this invitational together here in San Diego, and it was the second round. So I won my first match. He won his, and he like pulled guard right away and triangle choked me. I mean, it was like a sick triangle choke. It was like pulled into closed guard, hip bump sweep attempt, I post, jumped into a triangle choke. And it was so beautifully done. You know, obviously I was a little, you know, embarrassed by it, but I learned a lot about that match. Like the way that I just kind of like lackadaisically fell into his guard and like, how to avoid that from happening again. But also I was like, this isn't that big of a deal. Like everyone still loved me. Like my whole school at the time that I was teaching at was out there watching, and they all still like, I was like, this doesn't change anything. Yeah. It's not a big deal. Like everyone still cares about you. Not, it doesn't ruin your career just because you get tapped. You know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah. I think probably the best highlight reel that was done to me was in the semifinals of the trials, the East Coast trials in 2018. Tim Spriggs had a flying guillotine on me, and like, he just jumped up. I got a Russian on him, and he just went right into it. And the way I extended my head, there was a moment where he's all the way up in the air, hanging onto my neck. I was walking. I started walking out of bounds for a second because I didn't know where I was, and then some guy sort of pushed us back in, and I flopped over on my back, and that was all she wrote. And again, I remember there was a beautiful picture of him where he's like literally hanging on my neck, and his legs are up in the air like this. And I posted that up because, again, it's like you said, it happened, and obviously some people saw that and they were like, "Oh, Chewy got submitted," but then I remember it was like when Flo posted the podium and we're up there, right? Like I remember like everybody's like, "Oh shit, Chewy's up there." So like you realize like it doesn't matter, right? Like, because it's just a match. Everybody understands that you get tapped. Everybody gets tapped as part of the game. And, we always talk about that in the beginning, like, oh, just, I don't believe in it, but they say lose your ego. I mean, I don't think it's not, don't lose your ego, but make your ego strong enough that you can take the losses. But, but I understand the way they say it. But anyway, you say that, but then again, like then you're in a situation where you're competing and maybe you might lose the match. Well, there's your chance to, put your money where your mouth is and actually exercise that virtue of courage and, virtue of actually taking on the losses and learning from them.
Yeah, 100%. And on the other end, though, you got to take the wins with a grain of salt too.
Sure.
See a lot of people who freaking just like, they stand up after a win and they like are slapping the mats and beating their chest like King
after
Kong.
Advantage win.
Yeah, it's like, bro, it's like it's like you didn't even do anything that cool, But
bro. Oh man, I've seen some pretty gnarly ones at like some of the IBJFs. So like they'll get like a I've had one before, but you'll get like an advantage win or something. And the guy's just like, I mean, like I said, ripping the gi off, Jesus, pointing to this, the slap in the mat. You're like, bro, this was, I mean, I can understand if you just friggin' whack someone in like 5 seconds with a really cool submission, maybe, but like you just squeaked by a little bit, or maybe even get like a ref's decision. You know what I mean? Like it's just get your hand raised and like look like you've been there before.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just kind of, I think like there are exceptions to celebrating after a win if it's like a really big win against a really big name or
in the finals or something, So
yeah, but then there's like I think people freak out over a lot less, and I'm like, hey, just act like you've been there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it goes both ways with the wins and losses, right? If you lose and you don't really make a big deal out of it versus you win and don't make a big, it doesn't, I think, maybe impact you as intensely. Like you don't take the losses as hard.
Yeah.
Because I think you're just kind of
like because what goes up must come down. So if like you're freaking out that hard after a win, you're probably going to be crushed when you get lost or when you lose. So take every win and loss just with a grain of salt and just move forward.
Right.
Yeah, it's an attachment thing. You have to be kind of detached from it, right? Like if you win, great, you won. If you lose, fine, whatever. Like again, because again, these are the problem is what happens a lot of times, especially with like younger people. It kind of goes when you get older. Is you become attached to these things that are happening, and then your personality, who you think you are, is those things, right? So, for instance, it'll be like, I am a world champion. That's something you've done. Yeah. That's not actually who you are. You're so much more than that. You're a completely different person, but these are things that you've done and you're more than these things. But in a lot of cases where people become really attached to their identity as a world champion or as this or that or whatever, and then one of those losses happens and it crushes them because then it shatters that identity. Well, you were a world champion last year. This year you are not, right? Like, so it's tough. So I think it's like a detachment from those things.
Yeah. I think it's I agree. Well, yeah, you're going to go through, like I said, being a high level competitor, you go through a bunch of wins and losses. I mean, that's it. I mean, you have to, like, when you're competing against the highest level competition, like that's the only way you're going to probably take some losses. You're going to obviously take hopefully some wins. That's going to keep you out there. But how you deal with that stuff. Is there like, you shared like a particularly tough loss, or like maybe a moment in competition, or you feel like that was a big learning experience or growth moment for you?
As far like a loss, maybe that
it could be whatever. It could even be a win, something that you really learned from a win. But most of the time people, I think, losses are kind of more of a learning experience. I think if you win, you're kind of like, oh, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing kind of thing. But
yeah, well, I mean, the two that pop into mind are, well, I got heel hooked at this EBI trials when I was still with 10th Planet. By Mike DeWitt. He's a black belt up in Oregon, a 10th Planet black belt. And I was a purple belt at the time. And I had all my like friends and teammates gassing me up for the EBI trials. At the time, if you're a 10th Planet guy, like EBI trials was kind of a big deal because then you could get your spot in EBI. And EBI was one of the biggest things at the time. You know what I mean? It's not so much anymore. I mean, it's still, I think EBI is still around, but you don't see them as often now. But all my friends were, our teammates were like, Sloan, you could win this one, dude. Like everybody in this bracket, you can beat them. And so I had my head so big, like I'm going to go in there, I'm going to smash everyone. No one's going to have a chance against me. And they pair me up with Mike DeWitt first round. And one of my teammates had just beat him in a competition. And this teammate I do pretty well against. Like I would, usually tap him in training. So I'm like, okay, well, if he tapped Mike, I'll be just fine against him. And I go up against him, and he freaking heel hooks me like 3 minutes in. And so first round of the tournament, I just get heel hooked. I'm out. Dude, I went outside, and I'm like 23 or 24 at the time. But I was like, I was in downtown LA. It was Eddie Bravo's gym. And I go outside, and I'm crying and like just so embarrassed and upset and hurt by it, and my coach came out and was like, hey, bro, it's all good. He was like, it happens. You went out there and tried. He's like, Mike's tough. Like, obviously, if he was able to do that to you, then, and I was just so hurt, man. And, but then after that, I just realized, like, I remember thinking, like, I got to stop taking this so seriously. That wasn't what I felt that night. Like, that wasn't, I don't want to feel that. Like competition is supposed to be fun, and that wasn't fun. I just made it a miserable experience for myself. And I think that I made that experience miserable for myself because in my head I was so outcome oriented, and all I was thinking about is that I was going to beat everyone and I was going to win and I was going to be an EBI. And I called my parents back home and I was like, I'm going to do this EBI trials and I'm going to be an EBI and I'm going to win that too. I had all these ideas in my head, and then it just like 3 minutes in, I get up there and I get tapped, and I'm like, you got to stop caring so much, bro. This isn't worth it,
Yeah,
so that was a big
focus on an expectation
for me for competition. But then also like my win against, when I went up against Nicky Rod a couple of years ago at that Subversive and I beat him. I was pretty nervous about that. And I was like, I was just like, damn, this guy's a lot bigger than me. I weigh 205. He probably weighs, I don't know, 240 or something. And it's something that I couldn't get out of my head is, Nicky Rod, he's like a pretty strong wrestler, real heavy on the head. He pushes and pulls a lot. And the subversive stages are elevated. And so, dude, which is dangerous. I mean, can we agree on that? Like
I don't like the elevated stage personally.
I don't like it either, man. I think it's dangerous. And dude, all that elevated stage is like concrete floor.
Yeah.
It's not padding down there. And it's like, 3 or 4 feet elevated off the ground. And so for whatever reason, like the day before this match, when I get paired up with this guy, like I'm confident. I feel like if I go up against anybody, I can beat anybody if I play my cards right. So I felt like I had a good chance of beating this guy, but I was like, oh my gosh, what if we get in a crazy wrestling exchange and this dude throws me off the stage and I freaking hit head first and die or something? I'm like having all these crazy irrational thoughts in my head. And it was making me really nervous. And but it was, I had to just deal with those thoughts. I was like, you just got to do it. Like there is no choice. You just go as hard as you can against this guy and do your jiu-jitsu. And then I went out there and I was super nervous for, the match. Even I remember walking up on stage, I was really nervous. And then, the bell rang and I just started scrapping, and then I wanted decision, and I was like, oh, that wasn't even that hard. You know what I mean? It was like, why? And it's like, why did I build up so much? Like the past 24 hours, I've been torturing myself mentally, worrying about this guy and worrying about, getting hurt in this match or what, you know what I mean? Whatever. And I was just like, like I said, I was still confident in myself and my abilities, but I was just like, all the nerves, and nerves are a good thing to a degree, but they can also, mess with you, and I was like, you just got to believe in yourself a little more, dude. Stop worrying so much. So that was a big moment of growth for competition for me too. It was like, you're capable of a lot more than what you think, man, as long as you go out there and give it your all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and also too, you get used to you start having, you've had practice with those nerves. So that idea of having all these irrational thoughts of what's going to happen, you almost expect them. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, it's going to happen, because whenever you're getting ready for something, it's like your body's desire to try to get you to not do that thing. And then once you're out on the mat, it's like that turns off and your body's like, all right, we got to fight now. We don't have time to think about, getting away. But beforehand, I feel it's your body's response to we might get hurt in this thing. So let's try to steer you away from it mentally. And maybe we can get you to quit, so that we won't be put in that dangerous situation. But then obviously if you just do the damn thing, then when you're on the mat, that turns off, and then your training kicks in, and then you just go out there and do what you're going to do.
Well, yeah, it's like fight or flight, right? And, it's like our brains are designed to get away from trouble. So if you're going to be in a situation that you could get hurt, we want to run from that. But then, so that's the toughest part of getting to the match, is it's your body's resistance to wanting to get up there and fight. But then once you're up there, that turns off and the fight kicks on, and you're just like, all right, it's time to scrap. You're not you just go on autopilot.
That's right.
Yeah. It's usually the worst part is the anticipation, right? Once you're on the mat.
We always say the weight. The weight is the worst part, right? The waiting is the worst part.
Yep.
Because you just make it you make it this crazy thing in your head. A life or death thing, right? Where probably chances are, worst case scenario, well, hopefully worst case scenario is you get submitted or you lose, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're I could die, I guess sometimes that fear could be, it could help in some ways, I guess. It makes it more of a life or death situation in your head. I don't know. You start playing those games with yourself, with your mind, but I don't know. I think that we talked about, the waiting is the worst part, because if you can kind of get through those hours or days beforehand without letting your body get so wasting so much energy on the nerves, I think that's the main thing. If you don't let because that can exhaust you itself, just getting through the nerves.
Yeah, that's uncomfortable, dude. If you let yourself drown in those nerves and those thoughts, man, it's it will just torture you, and you got to just kind of figure out a way to shut that off or ignore it. And I think I'm pretty good nowadays at compartmentalizing those nerves and kind of just getting rid of them until, it's time to go.
Is there anything you do that helps you kind of keep yourself focused and more calm?
I just try to keep my mind off it. That's really that's the best thing. If I have a competition coming up, I just, do whatever I can to not think about that competition. I remember there's an old Rocky Marciano quote that I read probably a couple of years ago, and he was like, two things that I do to succeed in fighting. He was like, I keep my body well conditioned, and I forget all about the other fella until I step into the ring with him. Mm-hmm. It's that's a good thing. He's like, I just basically try to just shut that off until I'm there and it's time to scrap. Right. I'm like, I would agree with that. That's probably the best route to take.
Awesome. I do have one more question. How did you and Chew, if you got anything else, how did you get your nickname, Caveman? How'd that come about?
So it goes back to the whole story with the barn, where I started training with my dad. So when I was a little kid and my dad, had built this barn and he was doing these training sessions out there, a lot of the guys that were training there on weekends, they were competing too. They were competing in jiu-jitsu tournaments. They were doing MMA fights. And and they would also call it the cave. They would call the barn,
I gotcha.
That was the cave because like quite literally because there was no heat in the barn and there was no air conditioning. So in the summertime, it was like freaking over 100 degrees in this barn. And in the wintertime, it was freezing cold. We had like a little crappy space heater that barely did anything. Snow would trickle in from the roof and literally be around the mat. And we would still be rolling. We just like layer up in sweatpants and sweatshirts and grapple. And so they always called it the cave. And then when they were all competing, my dad was like, well, I guess we need like a name for this, for our club. And so my dad decided to call it Caveman Combat. And me as like a little 8-year-old kid at the time, I always liked drawing. I was real into art and drawing pictures and stuff. And my dad was like, hey, he was like, I want you to draw me a picture of a caveman. He's like, just like a jacked caveman with a lot of muscles and a big club in his hand, like a wooden club. And so 8-year-old me drew this caveman for my dad. He took it to this t-shirt shop and had a bunch of t-shirts made. And it said on the front, Caveman, Reality Combat and Conditioning. And on the back, it says, the original no holds barred fighter, and it has the little caveman that I drew. He just thought, what cooler thing than to have my son draw this caveman and put that on the shirt. You know what I mean? Yeah. Instead of paying like, some graphic designer or something. And so we still have those shirts to this day. Dude, I just wore one yesterday. I got like 4 or 5 of them in my closet. And so, as the years went on and I got into jiu-jitsu and I would bring a lot of my buddies out to the barn to train, they started just kind of calling me and my dad the cavemen, They would be like, oh, we're going to go train with the cavemen and stuff. And then, I don't know, at some point it just, like, I didn't force it at all. It was like super organic. Like people just started calling me the caveman. And then like I moved out here to San Diego and I used to always just like, anytime I would post like a combat sports related picture on my Instagram or anything, I would hashtag like Caveman Combat or something. And then that nickname just followed me out here to San Diego. And like all my teammates would call me that. I never like would claim that was my nickname at all. I was never like, call me the caveman. It was nothing like that. People started calling me that, and it just kept going and going. I didn't even want the nickname at first. I thought it was like, I was like, no, that's a silly nickname, but people kept calling me it. And eventually I was like, it just grew on me after years of being called that. And so by the time I was 25, it was like established, like at my gym, everyone called me that. And so I was like, I guess I'll just make it official and get the tattoo on my forearm.
That's cool.
There you go.
Yeah, that's a good organic name rather than like you said, going around like, oh, this is my nickname. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's why I try to be very clear about that. I'm like, I didn't tell people to call me this at all. It's like, that nickname got forced on me. But now, I like it. It's cool.
Yeah, it's cool. I dig it, man.
Yeah.
So Sloan, wrapping up, man, what do you got coming up? Anything in the future? And then if people want to, find out about you, connect with you, where can they do that?
You can follow me on Instagram. That's where I'm the most active, just at Sloan Clymer. And, as far as the future goes and kind of what I'm trying to do now, I'm 31. I turned 31 a few months ago. And I don't know, just turning that age was like a little bit of a reality check. And I was like, man, I got like, another 8 or 9 years if I'm lucky to really compete, at a high level. And I'm like, I don't want to just do jiu-jitsu. And so I'm really trying to get back into MMA, and I'm going to make my pro debut this year. That's the plan. So I had a couple of amateur fights when I was younger, when I was living in Indiana still. And I've also had like a boxing match a few years ago, but so yeah, I'm just trying to get back into MMA and getting back in the swing of training for that. And I want to, make a little run fighting. I don't know how far I'll take it. I don't know if, I promise myself I'll do like at least like 5-ish pro fights or something and see if I want to continue on after that. But that's what's next for me. I want to fight. I want to keep competing in jiu-jitsu. I want to competing, maybe even like some stand-up, like, maybe some like kickboxing or boxing as well. That's something that's interesting to me. I just love competing. I love martial arts. And so that's what I'm going to keep doing. And I'm going to be the best instructor I can be as well. If anybody's ever out in San Diego, I'm at Legion American Jiu-Jitsu. I teach here Monday through Friday, 10:30 a.m. And then I also teach our night classes as well for no-gi. So yeah, that's kind of my plans for the future.
Cool, bro. Well, good luck to you in the MMA realm, right? It's a whole nother can of worms to jump into, but I'm sure you'll be successful. So good luck with that, and good luck with any matches that you get into in the future.
I appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Appreciate you being on, bro. Man. All right, guys. Thanks for being on the podcast today. There was an interesting part of that podcast that I didn't really go too much deeper into, but the idea of attachment and sort of getting attached to an outcome.
Yeah.
Every person that I've talked to, like high level competitor, like ADCC champions, world champions, things like that. One of the things that I've talked to over the years and things that they've talked about, and this is stuff that goes back to, ancient Japanese like martial arts culture, is the idea of not being attached to the outcome. It's something that happens to a lot of people. Everybody wants to win, and they start getting really fixated with being up on the podium or getting the gold medal or winning the belt or whatever it is. But again, those things take you away from the actual what is required of you to do that. And what's required of you to do that is to use your skills, right? And a lot of times I think they would say mushin no shin, no mind. Like mind, no mind. If your mind's elsewhere, then it's not focused on what it should be focused on, which is fighting the fight, right? And so just an idea to chew on, guys, as we're leaving you today. Big thanks to you guys for listening to the podcast. Again, if you guys want to check out our sponsors, you can do so by going to charlottesweb.com. They make great CBD products that can be really useful, especially if you're getting, I just say this because that's where I'm at, so I share it from that standpoint, getting a little bit older. I'm really focused on, being able to train consistently and being able to manage my recovery. So any little tweak, that thing that I can add to it to help out is important. Obviously, lots of water, diet, sleep, those things are key. And then you get into supplementation, and CBD supplements can be a great thing for that. Again, you can check them out at charlottesweb.com. The promo code is Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order. Personally, I just take a tincture before bed, and that seems to help. But I know other people have different protocols, and you can look those up. And Charles Web also has a lot of other supplement sort of concoctions with the CBD to assist you with everything from, resting, recovery to trying to focus on your work and having more of a clear sort of mindset. So again, you can check out their website at charlottesweb.com, and the promo code to save 30% is Chewjitsu30. Also, thanks to Epic Roll. My buddy Matt at Epic Roll, he's been supporting the podcast for a while. I get all of my rash guards made through him. I love his rash guards and his shorts. It's literally the only thing that I want to wear when it comes to my no-gi training. Not saying that because he's a sponsor. I'm saying that because I even get my gi, my rash guards made through him. I get my gym's rash guards made through him. I love his shorts that he makes. He's got the 2.0 shorts, whatever. It's probably just his only shorts he sells now. But he's got the shorts. They don't have any Velcro. And I like the shorter version, the very comfortable shorts. And again, but everything he makes, from shirts, shorts, rash guards, gis, hoodies, everything else, great quality. He's got great customer service. And again, he's supporting a lot of jiu-jitsu practitioners out there who are trying to make it when it comes to competitions. He was just helping sponsor the PGF, which again is giving a big sort of light, for some of the younger competitors that are out there. And so if you want to check them out, you can go to epicrollbjj.com. If you browse through the website, you find something you like, check out with the promo code Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. And guys, if you want to support the podcast directly, you can do so by becoming a patron at the Patreon that we have set up for the podcast. It's patreon.com/the-jiu-jitsu-podcast. When you join up, you'll get access to an exclusive library of content, stuff like, warm-up routines that Eugene's put together, which could be really helpful if you're, again, struggling with recovery. A lot of times those warm-up routines, or even you can use it as a cool down and hold the stretches for a little bit longer and do the movements longer. That stuff's huge, right? It's just like, it's like 20 minutes. If you do that 20 minutes of like maintenance work, it makes a big difference down the road, and it will help you not be so banged up and be so damn sore, opposed to just leaving your gym, getting in your car, going home, and then just like letting those muscles tighten up. There's also some rolling sessions that I have on there, seminars that I've recorded, and you get an ad-free version of the podcast if you'd like that. And again, if you have a particular question that you would like to have put on the podcast, it'll get preferential treatment by being in the Patreon. So again, if you guys want to check that out, it's patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And guys, if you want to get my daily email and get access to a couple of free jiu-jitsu ebooks that I give away, you can go do that by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. When you join up, you'll get the 2 free ebooks. One is on developing a jiu-jitsu game plan for rolling or for competition. The other is on training strategies that you can use, whether you're a coach and you're directing the training, or if you're just a student who comes into the gym and you want to get more out of your rolling, right? And so that's what it's there for. And then when you join up, you'll get my daily email, which goes into everything from jiu-jitsu training, philosophy, diet, weightlifting stuff, that basically anything that I think I'm interested in that I want to share with you that I think might be useful to you. If you like the podcast, you like the YouTube videos, you'll like the emails. You can join the thousands of people that read them. And so again, you can get that at chewjitsu.net/join and unsubscribe at any time. And so, guys, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.